The past couple days, pretty much since the announcement, I've talked about Master Rule 5, and it's been really fun. I think you guys seem really excited in the comment section, and the views are just off the charts. So I'm going to make a couple more Master Rule 5 videos, and yes, just like I said in the last video, I am well aware it is not called Master Rule 5. I think the most correct description of it would be Master Rule 4.5 or Master Rule 2020, but as far as what people are actually looking up on YouTube to try to find videos about this new rule set, I think Master Rule 5 is by far the most popular, so I'm going to continue to put it in my titles just so that you guys can actually find and see these videos and know what I'm talking about. Anyway, in today's video we are doing a sequel or a different version of yesterday's video, because yesterday we talked about 10 individual cards that aren't part of archetypes that got buffed by this new Master Rule, and today's video we're doing a very similar thing, except instead of talking about individual cards, we're going to talk about decks and themes and archetypes. Now, I'm not saying that all 10 of these decks will be meta contenders once April 1st rolls around, but all of these decks have been directly impacted in a good way from the Master Rule change. As always, if you guys like to purchase any Yu-Gi-Oh cards, especially the ones that you're sort of preparing for Master Rule 5 with, make sure to use my link in the description below to tcgplayer.com. The first deck that I want to talk about of all 10 of these is Burning Abyss, and I want to say here that Burning Abyss was kind of weird. What ended up happening was that a lot of people predicted this is one of the biggest decks that was negatively affected by link summoning, and it certainly was negatively affected, but it actually ended up being pretty competitive. I mean, it topped multiple YCSs, it topped multiple regionals, and it actually survived many formats as a rogue contender. It was one of the very first decks that was able to take advantage of Sekka's Light when it first came out. But Burning Abyss definitely is still hurt by Master Rule 4. It definitely does suck not being able to summon your Burning Abyss monsters and multiple copies of Dante. At least now they have Cherubini, which is super powerful, but this change is actually going to make a huge difference for Burning Abyss, and if we get some cool builds out there, I mean, there's the Block Dragon build right now, but people can do some pretty insane things with Burning Abyss. It's a fan favorite strategy, of course, and I can't wait to see all the Burning Abyss players actually really try to pick up the deck again now that this new Master Rule is going to make it a lot easier to play. Next up, we have every single variant of the Blue Eyes White Dragon strategy, and I think I made a video a while ago that was titled the real casualties of link summoning, and what I was talking about in that video is that decks that don't special summon from the extra deck very much, they're not very effective. If they're only summoning one monster anyway, they don't really care. And decks that spam a million monsters, they don't care very much either about the link summoning restriction. However, there's a bunch of decks sort of in between those two categories that could summon maybe 3 or 4 monsters in a turn and usually ended on 2 extra deck monsters that now with link summoning really couldn't do that, and Blue Eyes definitely falls under that category. The Blue Eyes deck very often before Master Rule 4 could end on 1 level 9 synchro and 1 rank 8 monster. However, they do not have enough resources to not only make those 2 cards, but also make a link monster beforehand, so Master Rule 4 made it very difficult for a Blue Eyes player, especially if you were playing it as a hybrid strategy. There certainly were a couple Blue Eyes variants when Dark Matter was still legal, but overall the deck itself as a real deck and not just a deck to try to get to Dark Matter Dragon really wasn't very popular because link summoning really did hinder that strategy. Nowadays though, you can end on your level 9 synchro monster and your rank 8 monster, maybe something else, and I think that Blue Eyes is actually going to be a more viable casual strategy, probably not a rogue strategy, but at least a casually fun strategy than it was under Master Rule 4. Next up we have the DDD deck, and I think what's interesting about this one is that besides Burning Abyss, this is the one that has been the most talked up, the most amount of players that I've seen saying, okay, now I finally get a chance to play this deck. What happened with this, that it was very solid in the OSG for a long time. They had cards way before we got them here, and when we eventually got that structure deck, the DDD structure deck in the TCG, it actually was pretty good for about 3 weeks, and then Zodiacs came out, and then it completely went away from the competition, and that's kind of where people have been. A lot of people spent a lot of time trying to memorize very specific combos, very lengthy and complicated combos, and then after a couple weeks, it just didn't matter anymore. Zodiacs were just so much better than the DDD deck. The main issue with DDDs under the link summoning format or link summoning conditions is that you oftentimes wanted to summon a fusion monster or 2 and a synchro monster and exceeds monsters and pendulum monsters. DDDs really take advantage of almost every single extra deck mechanic in the entire game, more so than almost any other deck. However, oftentimes they couldn't do that while also trying to summon link monsters with good arrows throughout their combos, kind of similar to the same thing as Blue Eyes, and I think that now that this new Master Rule is out, this is one of the decks I would watch out for. I guess it's not out right now, but once it comes out in April, this is a deck that I think a lot of people are going to be looking to play at regional qualifiers. Then we have the Invoke Invoked deck. Now, I want to say right now that Mech Knight Invoked actually did end up being a pretty viable rogue deck for a while now, and I think right now the Mech Knight deck doesn't actually play invoked monsters, but it did for a while. It was a pretty popular variant at a rogue sort of level of competition. However, the invoked sort of archetype really hasn't been splashed in too many other decks than Mech Knights ever since Master Rule 4. If you guys remember back when Alistair the Invoker and all those Invoke cards first came out, it was splashed into a lot of different decks. You saw it in Wind Witches and Blue Eyes and all sorts of different strategies, because basically you just do your normal combos and then end with one invoked fusion monster. And that was pretty good, but with Master Rule 4, it oftentimes just wasn't really possible. Once again, you just couldn't make a Link monster and a regular Extra-Deck monster and your invoked Extra-Deck monster all in one turn. Now that this has changed though, and you can summon your fusion monsters to the main monster zone without summoning Link monsters first, I think the invoked engine actually will become more popular, and I can't wait to see what sort of decks people actually combine this archetype with. And then we have Dinosaurs, and I want to say that I think a lot of people don't think of this as one of the decks negatively affected by Master Rule 4, because yes, they still can do their normal combos in most scenarios. However, under Master Rule 4, it is oftentimes difficult to summon Dolka and a Link monster before your 5 summons. This means that it was very difficult to play around Nibiru a lot of the time, and sometimes you just didn't have enough extenders to actually deal with it. Now though, you can make the Dolka in the main monster zone and not have to worry about Link summoning, so you can summon that Dolka within 5 summons pretty consistently, and then you can just continue your normal combos to end on like VFD or Ultimate Conductor or whatever you're doing in your Dinosaur deck. If you guys were playing in late 2016, you probably remember the ABC structure deck coming out and just sort of wrecking every other deck in the format. There are a lot of really awesome combos in ABCs even after Link summoning. They sort of took advantage of the Nightmare monsters, but the original combo that they used wasn't possible under Master Rule 4. All you needed to do was open either Gold or Silver Gadget, which oftentimes were played as 3-ofs, and then Union Hanger or Terraforming. And if you open that, you could use the Gold or Silver Gadget to special summon a ABC monster from your hand that you search with the Union Hanger, and then you can make the Bujin Tsukiyomi card and then detach to draw a couple cards, and then you could pretty easily make ABC Dragon Buster every single turn 1. That was a very powerful combo, but not possible under Master Rule 4. Certainly they got other combos that were pretty cool, but now that we have the new Master Rule coming in April, you can actually do this combo once again. ABC Dragon Buster is still a very strong card. It might not be as strong as it was 3 or 4 years ago, but I think it still is pretty darn strong compared to other cards in rogue strategies, and I expect to see some ABC players really happy once April comes around. But what about Pure Thunders? You know, they're already topping right now, maybe not in their height of popularity, but still pretty popular. People like that deck a lot, and they actually do get a lot better with this Master Rule change. You no longer, if you don't want to, have to make some summoner or whatever that card is called, and that's pretty cool. You know, you can turn those 2 monsters, instead of making 1 Link monster to open up those Link zones, you can just make 2 Colossus or a Colossus and a Titan, whatever you want to make with your hand. I actually wouldn't be surprised if Konami nerfed the Pure Thunder deck by either limiting Colossus or hitting something else before April rolls around, but as long as the deck is at least a little bit playable once April rolls around, then Pure Thunder is going to be pretty good as a rogue strategy. And then we have Paleozoic Frogs, and I want to say that I can say this from personal experience that this is going to make a huge difference on how viable that deck is. I didn't get a chance to play it before Master Rule 4. You know, I remember Totally Awesome coming out right before Zodiacs came out, and it was really good for a couple months. And even after Zodiacs came out, the grass variant of Paleo Frogs actually was still pretty competitively viable. But I did get a chance to play a lot of Frog Paleozoics once Master Rule 4 came around. I played it with Mistar Boy, and I cannot tell you the number of times. I mean, I'll tell you right here, a lot of the time I really didn't want to make a Mistar Boy. I just wanted to make more Totally Awesomes or more of the Paleozoic Exceeds monsters, and oh man, this is going to make a huge difference for those Paleozoic Frog players. Paleo Frogs actually have gotten more support since Master Rule 4. We have Trap Trick, a very solid card in that deck, and I think that Paleo Frogs, I mean, they're always under the radar, but they could be a pretty darn good trap deck once this Master Rule happens, because now you don't have to use your Mistar Boys to actually summon multiple Totally Awesomes. You can just summon them if you want to. El Shaddoll Construct recently went to 3 copies per deck, and people were really excited. I remember when that card was banned for a long time, people really wanted it back, and Shaddoll Fusion is still a very powerful card. A lot of people are going to summon extra deck monsters turn 1, so using Shaddoll Fusion is pretty easy going second. And Shaddolls are about to get a structure deck, and that is going to be huge with this new Master Rule, and I think that enough players are still fans of Shaddolls from way back in the day, back in 2014 Duelist Alliance format, so I would expect sort of along the same lines as the DDD strategy that the very first couple weekends after after this Master Rule goes into effect at regional qualifiers and maybe even YCSs, expect to play against some Shaddoll players, maybe even some Shaddoll players that are teching the engine into other decks, just to sort of take advantage of the fact that Shaddoll Fusion and Construct are very, very powerful cards, even in 2020. Before we say the last deck, I do want to give an honorable mention to Madolches, and I want to give it an honorable mention here because I thought this change would actually make a huge difference, but I have been informed it actually doesn't. So why does this make a difference? Well, one of the things that sort of actually got lost when Master Rule 4 happened is that you could no longer do the basic Madolche Angeli combo with Hootcake and all those cards. You couldn't do the Invoker, the Leviaire, because you didn't have extra monster zones to summon both that card as well as the Tiara Misu you were trying to bring out. However, a bunch of you modern Madolche players out there on Twitter informed me that the main way that Madolche is actually combo off right now is the level 4 monster that came out a couple sets ago, and that card actually does restrict you to only summoning Madolche monsters during the turn that you use its big effect. So actually this doesn't really make a huge difference. Maybe it makes a difference in a couple combos, I don't really know. I mean, I played Madolches before the Link monster, before this new level 4 monster, so I'm a little bit out of date on my Madolche knowledge, but I think that it probably does come up occasionally enough to sort of mention it, at least as an honorable mention in today's video, even if it's not the biggest deal. And then lastly, of course, I have to include Fluffles on this list. I really never sort of imagined a day where I'd be able to play with Fright for Patchwork as well as pre-Master Rule 4, because we got that card so late in the TCG, and if you guys remember back in the OCG format when they had Fright for Patchwork, Fluffles actually were a pretty decent counter to the best deck of the time, Zodiacs, and I remember taking it to a regional. That was when we didn't have Fright for Patchwork because we got it way later, but I remember taking it to a regional, and yeah, it actually did counter Zodiac pretty well. Fright for Sheep in particular is pretty hard for that deck to deal with because Dryden can't deal with it and Whiptail can't deal with it, and all these cards really can't deal with it, but it never really became a truly powerful rogue deck. I remember right before Mermaid got banned, there was a cool Fluffle Orcus deck that was kind of neat, but in general, this boost actually does matter a lot. It was very annoying to have to summon Link monsters before doing your bigger combos, and sure, Sabertooth revives things from the graveyard, which does get around the Master Rule 4 restrictions, but there still were plenty of times really where you would want to like summon Tiger first to try to bait some back row, and if you didn't have a great way to get out of the extra monster zone, it was just kind of stuck there, and that really sucked. It's worth mentioning that in Ignition Assault, which is coming out relatively soon, we get a really fantastic Link 2 monster, Cloth Heap. I don't know what the English translation is, but that card is a very powerful Link monster, so this might not matter as much, but it still is pretty cool when you want to summon the monsters that you don't really care about first, just to bait your opponent's back row, and I think this Master Rule is going to be a huge boost to the Fluffle deck, which I am obviously a big fan of. Anyway though, that is all of the 10 strategies that I wanted to talk about in today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and like I said, I don't want to say here that all of these decks are going to be meta. I think the vast majority of them probably won't be, but they certainly do get boosted by this new Master Rule. Thanks so much for watching though, I'll catch you in the next video, goodbye.